Welcome and thank you for your participation, everyone. Sometimes we wait a little bit for people to stop trickling in before it started, but we have a lot of grounds to cover today, so I think we will start now. So again, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Anne-Hélène Maté, the Executive Director of the Natural Climate Solutions Division at the Canadian Forest Service, Natural Resource Canada. And today we're going to present a few things. So first we're going to go through a couple of presentations. So maybe next slide, please. We'll do a couple of presentations. So one on the 2 billion tree program, generally speaking, and one deep diving a bit in the call for proposal. And after that, we'll have a question and answer session. So with this, I'm going to put myself off camera so that we're not distracted. So next slide, please. For a few years now, maybe before I start, we started mentioning the traditional territory we speak from out of respect for the nation who has lived on these lands for thousands of years, but also I think as a reminder that understanding diverse rights and interests is what we will bring mutually beneficial success to our initiatives. So today I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional and ceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And for the rest of the session now, also to note, the session is in English. La séance en français a été offerte hier, le 20 décembre, et l'enregistrement sera disponible si vous voulez l'écouter en français. So this presentation is also being recorded and you can request a copy. Everyone is being automatically muted, and that is maybe to allow us to maintain the flow of the conversation. You can submit a question anytime using the question and answer function. It's at the bottom of your screen. If it's not immediately visible, you just need to take your mouse and hover near the bottom of the Zoom and the Q&A icon will show up. We will try and answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A session. We will moderate those and pick them in terms of frequency so that we kind of regroup the questions that many people are asking, and that is how we will prioritize those. Next slide, please. So we are doing a couple of polls during this session, and and this is the first one. We'd like to understand a little bit more about you and about people who are participating in this session. It will help us also structure future webinars. So you have 30 seconds. Thank you. So we have well, first I would say we have a very diverse group of people and a very large group of people who attended today with organizations or people representing organizations across the board, for-profit, non-for-profit, educational, indigenous, provincial, municipal. So that's very good, and thank you all again for attending. So next slide, please. So I'll share a little bit of information on Canada's commitment to use nature-based solutions to fight climate change. This is a commitment that first came out in the speech of the throne in 2019, when Canada pledged to use nature-based solutions to fight climate change, including planting 2 billion trees to clean the air and make our communities greener. Since that commitment was made, of course, things have changed. They've changed a lot. But even the pandemic has helped remind us of the important role that nature, and including trees and forests, play in our personal, but also in our community well-being. This really reaffirms the importance of investing in nature-based climate solutions, which is one of the strategies that the government of Canada is pursuing. So the 2 billion tree initiative is the focus today, but it's not a standalone program. It's part of a broader horizontal initiative, the Natural Climate Solutions Fund, which also include programs from Environment Canada called Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund, and one from Agricultural and Agri-Food Canada called Agricultural Climate Solutions. If you are interested in these other programs, we encourage you to look at the Natural Climate Solutions Fund websites, and it will lead you to those other programs. The three programs leverage advice from nature-based solutions experts and Indigenous knowledge keepers through an advisory committee. And the goal really is that our actions reflect the best science and include diverse perspective. Next slide, please. So why plant trees? Through the 2 billion tree program, we'll be planting 2 billion incremental trees over the next 10 years through afforestation and reforestation projects, planting trees within communities and urban centers. We estimate that this action could sequester 2 megatons of carbon dioxide per year in 2030 and up to 12 megatons in 2050. So the GHG is a huge thrust of this program, but by no means is it the only one. The program will also provide important co-benefits to communities and ecosystems. So I mentioned cleaner air and water to improve physical and mental well-being. This one is maybe of particular importance given the recent event. There is tree planting activities can increase the resilience of communities and forests to climate change related events. I'm thinking of wildfires, I'm thinking of flood and extreme heat events. Planting trees can also include, or will also include, restoration of habitat for wildlife and biodiversity. To this end, we've even included a 400 million in dedicated funding for actions to restore habitat with provinces and territories. Essentially, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the 2 billion tree programs aim to provide long-lasting benefits of many kinds. Next slide, please. So the program was allocated 3.2 billion over 10 years. It's a lot of money, and there's no denying this, but it's also really not nearly enough to plant even half of these trees. And so what the program is focused on to achieve success is cost-shared partnerships and also supporting research. This means we are seeking to support organizations rather than directly entering agreement with individuals. The intent is to have trees planted in both rural, urban, public land, private land with Indigenous peoples, but also in urban settings. Each of the 4 areas on the screen requires specific considerations and different dedicated partnerships. And so that's our way of conceptualizing how we'll go through this. Additionally, we recognize that leadership by Indigenous organizations and communities is critical to these initiatives. And we are co-developing a governance approach for the dedicated funding stream for Indigenous-led projects. Now, this is not final, so it will come in the future. Next slide, please. So this one is the one that has been recurring, and you may have noticed it in the news. What we're talking about here is not a sprint to the finish line, but a marathon. What it takes to plant 2 billion trees is not, well, first it takes trees, whose trees take time to be grown before they get planted. And it needs an increasing capacity of the entire tree planting supply chain. It's not something that can happen overnight. So through the expression, through the early start expression of interest, we got started. Experienced organizations with access to both land entries shared some project proposal. We funded 66 of these projects for a total of about 30 million trees when all is said and done. We also launched a request for information to make sure we understood what organizations' capacity was to participate, play with us, what were their needs and concerns and barriers they could see in terms of going forward. Based on both processes, so the expression of interest and the request for information, we worked to refine the program design, and this is where we are today with a new call for proposal. We aim to support partners to increase their capacity for future actions. And this will include the necessary infrastructure and growing the climate appropriate seedlings for future projects. This said, we are where we are today, but we have another 9 years to go, and we expect we'll be able to adjust the programs as we learn more. So I would like to thank you for your time. And before we get down into the call for proposal and I pass it to my colleague, Ben Wellen, we'll have another little poll.
Thanks, Anna-Lynn. So this one, we're looking for people to identify which which funding stream they're interested in applying to. So 30 seconds again, please. Okay, wow, that's a really even distribution of interest. Okay, so yeah, so if for those who may not be able to see it, we have for the mass planting stream about 32% of participants interested in that stream, 42% in the small scale, 40% in the urban, and then 40% in the capacity building stream. So great. The other thing this will help us with too is planning. So for the next steps in terms of where we might expect proposals and that kind of thing. So appreciate that and thank you. So I'll let the presentation get queued up. Perfect. So yeah, as Anna-Lynn mentioned, my name is Ben Whalen. So I'm one of the managers responsible for the in the 2 Billion Trees program. And I'm responsible for the program implementation and deliveries portion of 2 Billion Trees. Welcome to everybody. I appreciate you being here today. So hopefully you had a chance to take a look at the guides and all the associated materials. I know it just came out last Thursday, but we appreciate you taking a look. The focus of today's session is really to support you with your submission and clarify, the application process and answer any questions. As Anna-Lynn mentioned, questions can be asked at any time, and we'll answer them during the Q&A session. And as she had mentioned as well, we'll respond to as many questions as we can. If we run out of time, we'll provide some responses in writing. And then depending on demand, we may have, future webinars in January. Next slide. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. So what we're going to be talking about today, or what I'm going to go over just in terms of a brief overview of the call for proposals, is one, the context, so why and what we're hoping to achieve through this call for proposals, the key elements of the call, the requirements when completing the forms, the post-application process, so how proposals are going to be reviewed, the timelines for that, and sort of expectations, and then future opportunities with 2 Billion Trees program. Because one point I want to make to start with is that this is not the only opportunity to apply to this program. So there'll be others in the future. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to achieve through this call? So the first is that we want to respond to the significant interest in the program, and included in that is the diverse interest in projects that we saw during the expression of interest and the request for information process. And so that's why we created different funding streams in the hopes of helping organizations match the funding or match funding to what they want to do. The second is that we realize there's a significant ramp up needed to plant 2 billion trees, as Anna-Lynn mentioned previously. So another aim is to provide predictable and stable funding for organizations. And some of the tools we're using here is the option of long-term planting work, flexibility around some of the project inputs, and allowing for a broad range of projects. And the third aim is, complements the second in the sense that what we're hoping is that if we provide stable and predictable funding, that that we can support through that, or we can support in that way the supply chain in ramping up. And finally, we want to make sure that the 2 Billion Trees program is as inclusive as possible. And so that's why we're providing funding to help organizations build capacity and so that they can participate in the program. Next slide, please. So in terms of basic parameters for the call. So first is that only projects that propose to plant incremental new trees will be accepted. We won't fund any planting where there are legal obligations to replant or where the planting is a condition of an impact assessment or a replanting agreement. And then projects need to focus on either afforestation, reforestation, habitat restoration, and or capacity building. The call is open to all organizations and communities across Canada. Tree planting proposals can be single or multi-year projects, so single year or multi-year. Applicants can apply with multiple projects. You're not limited to one project only, but there's also only so much funding available. So please keep that in mind. We encourage groups to work together, but a lead applicant will always be needed to sign the contribution agreement. And the 2 Billion Trees program is a cost-shared program. So our aim is to fund at a maximum 50% of total project costs. As Anna-Lynn mentioned, the $3.2 billion available over the 10-year period is enough to plant half the 2 billion trees. So we're hoping that other organizations can contribute the other portion, the other half. We do have for Indigenous projects additional flexibilities of between 75 and 100% allowance to fund up to 75 to 100% of project costs. But fundamentally, to keep in mind as well is that this is a competitive call. Excuse me. So the more competitive you can make your proposal, the better, the more opportunity you have. Next slide, please. So the call is broken into two main streams. So whether you want to plant trees or whether you want to build capacity. So under the tree planting stream, there are three substreams. So mass planting, small scale planting, and then planting in urban and suburban areas. So the goal for the tree planting stream is, of course, to plant trees. But if you have an idea to build capacity as part of a tree planting project, you can include it as well, and you don't have to apply separately to the capacity building stream. So in other words, that capacity building can be part of a tree planting project. The tree planting stream is also contribution funding, which is subject to financial reporting and an audit by NRCan. The capacity building stream is meant for smaller projects that can demonstrate how project activities will support efforts to educate and to promote better forest management practices. It is also meant to reduce barriers so that organizations can participate fully in the 2 Billion Tree program. And for capacity building, the funding is going to be provided through grants, which are based on being and remaining eligible for funding. And it also requires that you provide performance reporting, but it's not subject to audit and there are no financial reporting requirements. Next slide, please. So in terms of a little detail on the different planting streams. So the mass planting stream is expected to make up the majority of funding and result in the bulk of the trees planted. As I mentioned before, a single applicant can aggregate multiple project partners where they can demonstrate a capacity to manage those different organizations or coordinate, the management of a project, I should say, is a better way to say it. And this is the only stream, the mass planting that can have long-term planting work. So that's where tree planting, where the planting site may not be known, but elements like tree species, types of locations, types of planting like afforestation or reforestation, and the seed zone or region may be known. We expect smaller scale planting projects to be shorter in duration, and that recipients would have a general idea where trees will be planted by the time an agreement is signed. And for urban and suburban planting projects, we expect them to have a higher human well-being or have higher human well-being co-benefits. And from an urban-suburban project or a stream, we're also encouraging smaller municipalities to work together under single applications, or single application, given the minimum planting per year. But again, you would need a lead applicant to be part of to take charge or be responsible for the project administration. So next slide, please. So as Anna-Len mentioned in her presentation, 2 Billion Trees is a nature-based solutions program to sequester carbon. So fundamentally, we're looking for projects that have demonstrable GHG sequestration benefits, have co-benefits, so either human health and well-being or biodiversity, and are targeted towards afforestation, reforestation, and or habitat restoration. And of course, the more significant the benefits of your projects, the more opportunity you have for funding. We're also looking for experienced organizations with proven capacity to deliver. So we want to know when, in your proposal, what we're looking for is that we know that organizations can either manage, that can manage tree planting projects successfully, will know how to plant the right tree in the right place for the right reasons, their project will be able to contribute to increased biodiversity, that they'll be able to monitor a tree survival and report on project outcomes, and then comply with applicable COVID health and safety protocols. Fundamentally, the project eligibility is fairly broad, and we're looking for, creative and good ideas. And so at the end of the day, projects that can demonstrate that they're achieving good benefits for reasonable value for money and have the ability to manage the proposed project have a good opportunity for funding. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, also, one of the key goals of this CFP is to provide stability and predictability to applicants and related suppliers along the supply chain. And so this gets to, why we have this long-term planting work as part of the mass planting stream. So the intent of the long-term planting option is to allow recipients to enter into long-term agreements with seedling suppliers, thereby increasing the supply over the long term. We encourage planting organizations to put forward proposals that incorporate long-term planting. Over time, we're hoping that through long-term agreements, nurseries and other parts of the supply chain will expand capacity to meet new demand. Those applying for long-term planting will need to demonstrate a track record of success and must provide a plan to grow and deliver on their intentions. Applicants will need to provide key details of their planned long-term planting work, such as seed zones or expected tree species, and a general budget for the type of work they're undertaking. So to support the risk-taking that some of the organizations participating in long-term planting work, what we're willing to do to help is to allow up to 100% of seedling expenditures, so up to a limit of 50% of total project costs, of course. But those 100% of seedling expenditures to be reimbursed as the project proceeds. So as the contribution under a 2 billion tree project is normally 50-50. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is we're willing to reimburse up to 100% of the seedling costs that are ordered for the long term as the project progresses. Next slide, please. So what are we looking for in the capacity building stream? So capacity building is focused on supporting organizations and participating in the 2 billion tree program. The capacity building grants are limited to 2 years and $150,000 a year, so a total of $300,000 for the 2 years. There's no obligation to plant trees under a capacity building project, but applicants will need to demonstrate that their activities either reduce barriers to participating fully in the 2 billion tree program, and encourage and facilitate their involvement in planning and undertake tree planting projects, contribute to the capacity to manage, protect, and monitor trees and forests, and of course, comply with applicable COVID health and safety protocols. Next slide, please. So what happens after you, sorry, I'm jumping slide here. So this is in terms of getting your submission to us, and then the next slide, I'll talk about what happens afterwards. So we've designed the guides to be a step-by-step document to accompany the application form. So each section in the application form is referenced in the guide. So you can, and in the guide, we're explaining, sort of each box and text box and piece of information that we're asking for. We provide you some additional information on what we need or what we're looking for you to insert there. So it's a helpful sort of step-by-step as you're filling that out. Make sure you complete the application form, whichever one that is that you complete, whether it's for the tree planting stream or capacity building stream, as a fillable PDF. So part of our process in terms of the number of applications we receive, in order to support our data extraction process, we ask that you not submit any scanned or printed PDF forms, only electronic version. So that way we can make our process on the back end a little more efficient. And if you have any technical challenge in completing the form electronically, please reach out to the program as soon as you can, and we can provide any support or advice needed. We also have other tools so that are part of the application. So you can send an email, and that'll be on a slide for now, where we'll provide you a copy of our GHG calculator if you don't already have your own process for calculating GHG sequestration numbers. We also have other Excel data sheets and samples of our reporting templates. So if you need any of those, you can email us to the 2 Billion Tree Program, and you see those here on the slide. We're also going to be sending you the frequently asked questions, so you can consult that as well if you have any other further questions. And then at any time, if you have anything that you're missing, please feel free to email the program. And it's in this presentation several times and also on the website. Also, please make sure you sign the application form either digitally or print the page, the signature page, sign it and scan it, and send that with your submission. But please make sure that it's signed. And remember, the submission date is February 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is the slide where I was talking about in terms of if you want, any email addresses to receive sample copies of the reporting requirements or the GHG calculators or anything else. And as Anna-Len mentioned, we'll send these presentations off afterwards, and you'll have those available to you. Next slide, please. So this is sort of to wrap up the presentation around the call for proposals, then we'll move into the Q&As. But so once you have your submission submitted, and we have it in our hands, so the next steps were really going to be that your proposal is going to undergo a review for eligibility, so against mandatory criteria. Some of those I've talked about during this presentation. Then the proposals are going to be reviewed by evaluation panels to assess the merit. And we hope to notify applicants of funding decisions by May 2022, whether positive or negative in terms of decisions. And what I mean by positive and negative is whether there's an opportunity for funding or whether there's not an opportunity for funding. Applicants who have their applications funded will then begin negotiations on contribution agreements. And as part of the funding agreements, once that's in place, you'll need to provide ongoing progress, financial and planning activity reports. And for the grants, there are ongoing sort of performance requirements or performance report requirements. In terms of the future and where I talked about this not being the only call for proposals, so we're also working, like the program is, on developing an ongoing call for proposals. So what we mean by that is we would have it open on an ongoing basis, so a sort of permanent ongoing call for proposals, and organizations could apply at any time. We then gather the submissions, the applications submitted on a regular basis, and then review them at certain times of the year. So the purpose of the ongoing call is to help organizations prepare their projects and submit them when they're ready. And so, fundamentally, the point is this call for proposals will not be our last, and there'll be other opportunities to apply. So even if the case may be that your proposal or your application is not successful in this round, that you can take feedback and think about again what if there's other things to add to your proposal or things that need to be taken into consideration, you would be able to apply again in the future. So it's not a final decision or anything like that in terms of that you can't ever submit again. So there'll be other opportunities for funding in the future. So I just wanted to close on that, and then we can move on to the question and answer session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, or I said maybe good morning to some of you. You're still in morning time here in the West. So we wanted to welcome everyone to the Q&A session. My name is Susie Dominicano. I'm one of the managers in the 2 Billion Tree program, and I'll be hosting the Q&A session. Just a little bit of clarity before we start, so everyone understands how this is going to work. We have a team that are triaging the questions as they come in. We want to avoid sort of duplication because we want everyone to have an opportunity to have their questions answered. Also, we have prepared an FAQ document that is very comprehensive that we will be sharing with all the participants today. And so if your question is not addressed in this session, there's a good chance it will be answered in our FAQs. And if at that point it hasn't been, once you've received the document, we'll invite anyone who still has questions to contact the program inbox, which is made available both in this presentation, on the program website, as well as in the guides and the forms as well. It has our program inbox. So feel free to send us questions if our FAQs doesn't help you understand, the question that you're looking to have answered. So we will try to answer as many questions as possible today. Yesterday was the French session, and it was a very great session, a lot of questions. So there's considerably more people today, so hopefully we get through most of them, but there's a chance we might not. So again, I will refer you to the FAQ document that we'll send after. Also, I just wanted to clarify that government offices are closed December 27th and 28th. And so if you send your questions in, that week of December 27th is going to be a little bit more limited in terms of staff, but we'll be back in action in the new year to answer any questions that you may have. So we'll start. When you have your questions answered in your Q&A, those questions will be made public. And so that's how you can track which questions we'll be answering. So the first question that we have is for Annalyn. In the funding stream question, there was no Indigenous stream. It was mentioned that there would be a specific Indigenous stream. Why not have that as an option?
So we have, for ease of application, we chose to focus on activities for our stream. So we have like do you want to plant, or are you seeking to support or enhance capacity? And the reason we did it like that is for this particular call for proposal, we do not yet have a co-developed governance for the Indigenous funding stream. But yet we wanted to make sure the program would be accessible by all. So we have it like that. Also, it can be sometimes confusing if you target the type of organizations in particular, because you have for-profit, private, for, like you can have organizations that meet more than one type of organization. And so we did it like that this way. But I think Ben also explained that we are aware of, for instance, maybe different needs or different ways of looking to support for Indigenous projects. And to this end, we're looking at different types of capacity, flexibility measures, let's just say. I will leave it at that, I think. Ben, you want to add something or not?
No, that's good. Thank you, Annalyn. Yeah.
Oh, you're on mute, Susie.
It had to happen at least once. The next question is for Ben. Along the same lines, do First Nation proposals need to look for supporting funding?
Well, I mean, I guess it would depend on how the proposal wants, how you would like to restructure the proposal. So as I mentioned, there's an opportunity for us to fund, between 75 and 100% of a total project cost for an Indigenous-led project, whether it's an organization or community. So it's really up to the organization how they want to propose the project. So not necessarily, but again, depending on how how many proposals there are and that kind of thing, it adds, if there's an opportunity for additional funding, it always helps. But there's an opportunity for 100% of funding from the 2 Billion Tree Program, for sure.
Thanks, Ben. So we have another question. Just going to scroll to it. Here we go. This question is for Annalyn. We submitted a proposal on May 27th for the RFI. We have not heard any response. What are the next steps? Can you speak to the RFI and the purpose of that and where that's led?
Sure. So the RFI was a request for information. So it was not a stepping stone to proposal and project funding. It was really to gauge the organization's capacities to engage in the 2 Billion Tree Program, what they saw as the big challenges, what they saw as their potential role in supporting the initiative, and what they saw as potential big barriers the program would need to address to see those projects materialize. So it was really a request for information to help us further structure the program delivery. So in fact, we do not anticipate specific next steps with respect to what we receive from individual respondents. We will post, it's our intention to post a summary of the findings on our webpage. But if you did submit an RFI that is very much so a proposal, I encourage you to recycle it in this call for proposal, I would say. So I know it's not an ideal response, but I think you have not wasted your time, and this would be where you can reuse some of your material.
Thank you. The next question for Ben. I'm surprised to see that you demand a minimum of 10,000 trees in urban areas. That seems excessively large. Can you speak to the minimum for urban tree planting?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, fundamentally, we struggled with the minimums in the sense that the 2 Billion Tree Program has limited resources to manage a lot of projects. So what we're mandated to do is try to fund as many projects as we can within the resources that we have. And so we set the minimum for tree planting projects, whether it's mass or planting or urban or the small scale, to what we felt we could manage in terms of volume. Now the numbers for the minimum can be an average per year. So it doesn't mean that there every year has to be 10,000. And we addressed that sort of yesterday in the French webinar as well. So there could be a potential to plant 5,000 trees in 1 year and 10,000 the next. But fundamentally, the minimums are set. But and so if there's a way for you to participate or join projects with another municipality or another community, then we would encourage that as well.
Thank you, Ben. So the next question for you as well, Ben. How will proposals be evaluated if submitting a complementary proposal to Environment and Climate Change Canada?
So so I mean the evaluation process we're working with, as Annalyn mentioned, there's Agriculture Canada and Environment Climate Change Canada, who are part of the Natural Climate Solutions Fund. So we're working closely with ECCC and AAFC in terms of the proposals that we receive. And so essentially what we would do is once we receive a proposal, we would take a look at the work being done. If you can highlight in your proposal that you're also submitting proposals to ECCC or to AAFC for their programs, that would be also helpful. And we're going to coordinate amongst ourselves in terms of having folks review and make sure that we're looking at the complementarity of the projects.
Thank you, Ben. This next question is for Annalyn. Reforestation projects are not eligible if they are associated with regular FMP, forest management plans. Planting projects, are they? Assuming they must be other plantings with different objectives than a regular reforestation from harvesting on Crown lands, forest management units.
So the short answer is that is correct. The program does not aim to replace the resources that would be required to fulfill legal obligations on regarding regeneration after commercial harvesting on Crown land. Similarly speaking, the program will not support business as usual generation activities after commercial harvesting on private land. So there is no legal obligation on that front, but it's still business as usual. And what the program aims to target is truly incremental planting over and above what would have otherwise happened. So they said, if some of your regeneration activities are over and above the usual, so for instance, you want to increase diversity, species diversity, and you're looking at planting different, maybe more expensive species as part of your regeneration, like, or let's pick on, for instance, hardwood trees. There's some things that could be eligible on that front. So it's really this business as usual, legal obligations. This is what we do not, we don't want to replace.
Thank you. The next question is for Ben. And actually, before we move to that question, I just wanted to reiterate to anyone who's joined the FAQ session, if you missed some of the instructions earlier, we're trying to take as many questions as possible, grouping some together to make sure that we can answer as many questions as possible. The FAQs will be made available to all participants after, including the copy of the presentations, the PowerPoint presentations. And after you've received all of this documentation, if you still have questions, we encourage you to email our program inbox. So with that, Ben, the next question, can the same organization apply for both mass planting and capacity building as separate proposals?
So if they want to do it under the tree planting stream, sorry, I'm just thinking about the capacity building under a tree planting project needs to be tied together. So there needs to be, so you could apply for a capacity building grant and the same organization could apply for a mass planting project. If you want to apply for a tree planting project with mass planting as part of that, a mass planting project with capacity building as part of that, then it needs to be tied together. Like it needs to be in terms of the scope of the project activities need to be related. And so that's fundamentally the way it would work. So under tree planting, it would be one proposal, but if you wanted to do a capacity building grant and then a tree planting contribution project, then those could be two separate proposals.
Thank you, Ben. The next question, also for you, Ben. For the capacity building stream, is the capacity that is being built to be able to plant 10,000 trees per year, or can the number of trees per year be more variable? So I guess the question is there like a minimum in terms of tree planting for the capacity building stream?
So there's no requirement to plant trees as part of the capacity building stream. So the capacity building stream it can be part of it, but it's not, it doesn't have to be part of it. So the essence of the capacity building stream is to allow organizations who maybe want to do education or outreach or promotion of forest management principles or principles around safeguarding trees or monitoring health and survival and that kind of stuff, or helping others learn how to plant trees. And so there can be some tree planting components, but it doesn't have to necessarily be part of it.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
And Alain, we have a question here for you around biodiversity. When increasing biodiversity, is there an emphasis on native plants?
Again, the short answer is yes. However, for instance, I'm thinking in particular in the urban context, we understand that especially where it gets really cold, in cities, for instance, there is quite a lot of salt that is used, that some native species may not be able to survive that type of environment. And so for the urban element, we're making some allowance around, yes, it's better if it's native, but ultimately if we plant native species in cities that just die over winter, then I guess we have all failed. So we recognize this is a real situation, and again I leave it at that. But in general it's better, and for all other type of planting, yes, the emphasis is on native tree species.
Thank you, Anne-Hélène. I'm just looking for the next one. Okay, this question is for you, Ben. If a municipality is looking at growing its own stock from seed and developing a nursery or greenhouse, trees would eventually be planted out. Would that be considered in a capacity building or urban planting stream?
That would be under the urban planting stream. So, and we got this question yesterday in the French webinar as well. So nursery, so the intent is not like under the program at this point to fund nursery, or it hasn't been the intent to create a separate stream for nursery infrastructure. But we are willing to consider sort of nursery support projects within the context of a general tree planting project. So in the case of this, the one related to the municipality, if the municipality is interested in creating a nursery or building a nursery to support future tree planting projects, and they can make it an integrated, a holistic project, then that could definitely be something that is eligible, versus simply just funding the creation of or building of a nursery.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Another one for you, Ben. In section 2.6 of the guide, it says the program allows for other FedProv support up to 100% of project costs. Does this supersede if the other federal funds say the stacking limit is 50%? So how do we manage that?
Okay, so well, I guess it would depend on the other department, I suppose. It would So no, it doesn't supersede. So the way the stacking will work is if you apply for the 2 billion tree program and you're telling us that, okay, you're asking for 50% from the 2 billion trees and another 25% is coming from another federal department. So that puts the stacking at 75%. But if the other program that you're applying to that you're asking for 25% says that their stacking limit is only 50, well, then that's a problem for them, for that other program. It's not necessarily a problem for us. Now, you know, is it, so it would depend on how those terms and conditions for that program are established or how they're written, whether there's any flexibility or not. But that's something we could always, you know, discuss with that other program as well.
Thank you, Ben. So we have another question. The notification of funding decision is made in May. If this is correct, how can you expect a spring planting requirement to be possible? Anne-Hélène, can you speak to that?
So maybe a small caveat that May is what we're aiming for. There's always the possibility it bleeds into June. Now the question is around there were two of them, and I'm not sure, I might be confusing them. There was around spring planting. Is that the one?
So the question is, if the decision comes in May, how do we manage spring planting?
Okay, so yes, so first of all, and that's a good opportunity to apologize to all of you in this group. We are aware that our timing is sub-ideal. We went as fast as we could, given this year's some of this year's interruptions and so on. And but that does put you in a difficult position because it's an awkward timing. Presumably, you're already planning your activities now for the spring planting. So we understand this to be sub-ideal. Now, if your project is approved, we are looking at retroactivity for well, up to the beginning of our fiscal year. So that's one thing we can support with. Of course, that does involve some risk taking on your part, should your project not be successful. There is one other option if your project does go ahead and you started work already before the fiscal year, and maybe I'll defer to Ben on that front. It's the possibility of looking at some of the work you've already done towards that planting and representing it as in kind into your proposal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would totally agree. So I mean, that's a definite opportunity, is that, you know, and if it's a 50-50 cost shared project, any funds that you would have invested to that point or whatever could be considered. So the way retroactive costs work is it's once the contribution agreement is signed, we can reimburse costs incurred up to April 1st, in the year in which the contribution agreement is signed. And the year, I mean by fiscal year. So for us is April 1 to March 31st. But we could recognize costs that were incurred prior to the signing of the agreement for a recipient's contribution towards a project.
Thank you, Ben and Anne-Hélène. This next question, maybe Ben, you can answer this one.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be a listing of approved projects per regions so that small groups can contact them to participate by planting trees in their own individual communities?
So we do make, so as part of a regular process, any agreement that we sign with an organization, it's proactively disclosed on the government's proactive disclosure website, which is, and those are posted 30 days after the end of the quarter in which the agreement is signed. So, for example, any agreement signed between April and June will be available at the end of July. If organizations are looking for, you know, other collaborators or that kind of thing, we're still looking into options of being able to share organizations, information about organizations who are interested in participating in 2 billion trees. And we're looking for easy ways to do that so that organizations could simply contact each other if they were interested in working together. But we don't have anything like that set up at the moment, but that's something we can look into if organizations were interested in that kind of thing as well.
Thank you, Ben. I'll move to the next question. Anne-Hélène, is site preparation an eligible cost? And are there any restrictions on types of site preparation? For example, returning soil to an area mined for aggregate or minerals?
So in general, silviculture activities that are required to plant trees are eligible activities under the program. Now, I think this question also gets to the issue of additionality and incremental activities, because for potentially, so I don't know the particular of the situation, but a lot of aggregates and mining activities in Canada have obligations once their activities have stopped with respect to soil rehabilitation and stabilization. So the program would not cover those obligations. Now, we also know that in a lot of cases, the obligations this type of industries do not go as far as actually having a healthy ecosystem in place with trees and whatnot, and that we can support. So, it's a bit of a case by case issues. If what you're talking about is over and above what was to be done or under as obligations, then yes, we would support it.
Merci, Anne-Hélène. Thank you. I'm in my French mode now. Next question would be for Ben. For how many years has a proponent to monitor survival, and with what frequency? Can the cost of monitoring in future years be added to the cost of the project proposal?
So the program is up until March 2031. And so the reporting that we're going to be, asking for, one is in the application, we're asking for what are your plans for long-term monitoring of tree health and survivability. What our requirements are from a program perspective is that we want to know how much money you've spent and what trees you've planted. We have planting activity reports for that. And then we want a final report on the project. At that point, there's no ongoing reporting obligations after the project is over. Now, will we as a program follow up and do some monitoring? Yes, but that would be outside of the contribution agreement structure. In terms of costs, so the cost potentially, but it would need to be within a limited confine of time around the project. So we know that a lot of organizations and governments monitor a long time after the planting is done, but we, in terms of what we'll accept as ongoing costs or costs that could be represented towards the project, would have to be kept to a reasonable minimum, so within a few years of the project. Although we know some organizations will spend a decade monitoring tree health and survival. So and we recognize that because the program goes to 2031, there may be some of those costs that happen after the program is over too, so we can recognize some of those as well as part of the recipient's contribution towards the project. But I guess fundamentally you would have to demonstrate in the proposal that those costs exist, or that there would be requirement to do that.
Thank you. So another questions around nursery, Ben. Are investments in nursery infrastructure to increase capacity to be included in mass planting applications, or would it be a separate application under capacity building? So we've kind of answered this one previously, but maybe clarifying for nurseries where that would sit.
Yeah, so I mean, it would apply to any sort of mass planting, or sorry, it would apply to any tree planting project. We would see it most likely under a mass planting, potentially under the an urban scenario that we had discussed. Again, the nursery portion of a project would have to be specifically tied to a planting project, so as a direct result. So the idea of funding some nursery that's not tied to specific tree planting, or where that then there's no correlation between the two, or very little correlation, then that would not could not be supported. The capacity building, I mean, is small dollar amounts, so depending on what could be done, but there's no intent to support through the capacity building nursery infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Annalyn, can you give examples of capacity building projects that could be considered for funding?
Sure, I'm gonna maybe make some up here, but in general, so you will have noticed that the eligibility for the capacity building stream is restricted, and it's restricted to essentially smaller organizations that might require support to essentially bring a tree planting project to success. And so the capacity building stream is really geared at supporting this aspect, so getting ready for success, and could include things like building a business case, building a plan. I saw earlier there was a question of a municipality that was seeking to that actually asked these questions. Could we apply to this to get ready to have a plan for how we will do this in our area? So that would be one example. Other beyond the planning and the logistics, there is also this element of education. For instance, some project might require support or buy-in of the greater community or something. So education could be part of the capacity building proposal. And more generally, I think there are a series of examples laid out in the guide to help you get a sense of what those could be.
Thanks, Annalyn. We have a question on for Ben. Would an organization be permitted to submit additional applications for new projects in the future if a previous project has already been funded?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
There you go. Next question. Let's see. Also for you, Ben, can all tree planting streams include multi-year tree planting projects?
Yes, they can all be multi-year. Yeah, for sure.
So I think we do have some limits in terms of like the length of the projects. I think the grant application is the one that we limit to 2 years.
Yeah, sorry, I guess I understood the tree planting, but so in terms of the funding streams, so capacity building is limited to 2 years, so the grant portion. And I mean, we expect so just to, I guess, to give a bit more context or whatever, but so under the mass planting, because we part of this is we want to communicate this too. So part of the mass planting portion or stream, where we talk about the long-term planning, planting work, is that's where we're hoping that through longer-term, larger-scale agreements where organizations, there's an existing inventory of trees or seedlings that are available, but in a number of years, there's no trees available or seedlings available for planting work that might want to be done in years 3, 4, 5 from now. So the mass planting, that's where we're looking for those longer horizon kind of projects where we can support the increase in capacity or the expansion around nurseries producing more seedlings for projects. and then the, the smaller scale projects, or the smaller dollar value, or small envelope, or stream is really meant for, sort of shorter duration projects where there's sort of a known quantity or inventory of trees available, but it can still be multi-year. So it could be over a few years. And same with urban, could be multi-year as well. But the big focus around the long-term planting work, which I talked about, is really to grow that capacity around seedlings and ramp up, the production, so we can get into those, as Anna-Lynn had in her presentation, the large ramp up of planting in the later years of the program.
Thank you, Ben. Next question for Anna-Lynn. Is there any room for negotiation of carbon credits?
No, not at this stage. So we realize that is something that a lot of people are looking for. The issue with this one is that our frameworks are not in place yet to fully administer the accountability of carbon credits. And so we will consider those going, in the future. We are working actively with Environment Canada, the Carbon Credit Bureau office, to find a way to make this happen. But this is not ready, and therefore we are not including it at this stage. For those of you who participated in some of the webinars from colleagues at ECCC for the Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund program, for the same reason, they also are not proceeding with that this year, with their call for proposal. So it's something we're looking into, but not at this stage.
Thank you, Anna-Lynn. Ben, can the same organization apply for both the small scale and mass tree planting stream?
Yeah, sure, as long as it's not the same project. Yeah.
For Anna-Lynn, on commercial harvest sites, would any extra seedlings planted beyond minimum stocking standard density be eligible for funding?
So this one is a tricky one, and I think we started touching on that in one of the earlier questions, because we don't want to just use the program to increase activities for commercial purposes. So if for having a healthy forest, what you would need is a higher density than what you're going to do, then the program this is not the right place to seek resources to do that. If what you're seeking to do is to increase biodiversity, look at a mix of hardwood, softwood, depending on the ecosystem, of course, then that's something we would consider. So I would say, without getting down the weeds of decision tree, it would have to be looked at on a case by case. But generally speaking, just increasing density of spruce on spruce stands, regular commercial spruce stands, this is not the idea of the program.
Thank you, Anna-Lynn. Ben, are there restrictions on the size of the trees planted?
You mean like the caliper, like how old they are kind of thing?
Yeah, that's how yeah.
Okay. I don't know, that gets to a question we had yesterday too. I mean, fundamentally, no. I mean, I guess it would depend on the scope of the project. I mean, in an urban environment, obviously we're expecting trees to be, larger and that kind of thing. If you're talking about, a mass planting project, I mean, we have had questions around, transplanting before. So like that there's trees in one area that they would want to transplant into another area. I mean, again, everything is a possibility. It would just depend on the context, and I guess how the organization would make the argument in terms of, what they want to plant and where they're sourcing it from, and whether it's the right tree for the, in the right place. So So I would, we need a little bit more context maybe, but I know there's no specific maximum age, I guess.
Okay,
And
thank
maybe
you.
though, yeah, I was just going to add maybe, I mean, ultimately, depending how far back you go, well, you get to the seed stage. And I would say that at this stage, we're looking at trees for planting, seedlings, whips, and there were some questions related to like what type of planting material. Again, it goes back to the presentation earlier where the program will adjust and adapt as it goes forward. At this stage, we are looking at planting seedlings, and maybe as we as to demonstrate the feasibility of alternatives, look maybe into broader eligibility of seeds. So that goes to the planting material. Whips also would be something we look into as long as they are trees, so that goes again to the planting material questions and the age and the type. So that, again, trees rather than shrubs. And some of these definitions will also be in the question and answer document we'll share with you.
Thank you, Annalyn and Ben. I guess this question is for Ben. You mentioned the specific sites to plant need to be included in an application. So I think this is with regard to like the mass planting. Are you looking more for sites confirmed available for planting already versus those targeted for planting as part of a bigger multi-year program proposal?
So, so I guess in terms of sites, it would be what you have or what is known at the time of, filling in your application. So with the mass planting, we have sort of two pieces. So there's a planting site. So, where the first couple of years or, first few years of a project that you're applying to, you have a general idea of where the, your sites would be. And that you have, an inventory to access to plant. And then, we get into the sort of long-term planting work where we're expecting, probably a little less precision around, a specific site that you would be, that you would have in mind, but that you would be in those scenarios looking for sites, but have a good track record on being able to deliver on planting projects. So it's a bit of I guess it's a bit of you making an argument as an organization within your application to talk about track record. So when you're presenting the project, you're going to, say these are the number of trees that we want to plant. This is where, this is sort of what we want to plant and where we want to plant. Maybe some of the specific sites aren't known, but you can talk about your experience in being able to manage, and deal with that sort of project input in terms of how you go about securing land or areas to plant, or how you work with different partners. So, we have a number of organizations where their planning partner might, a planting site might fall off the table, but they have the capacity to they have alternate places to plant the trees. So, if you can talk about some of that in your proposal, or, as well, in terms of how you're able to manage that and deal with those contingencies. But essentially, the project inputs at the time of your application don't have to be absolutely known, but then it'll be up to you as an organization, as an applicant, to demonstrate how you can manage that uncertainty.
Thank you. Ben, another question. We have purchased seedlings and small trees from 3 suppliers in our area. I think they will be challenged to supply up to 10,000 trees in the first year of a project. Do you have other suppliers?
So no, we don't have suppliers. So the 2 billion tree program is not so is it's sort of a proposal based program. So we're not going out there to source trees or seedlings for any of the organizations looking to apply, we're expecting that applicants or organizations that we're funding to go out and source, your own seedlings based on, knowing the right tree for the right place kind of thing. And so, I guess as a solution to that is, something I mentioned is that the minimums can be an average over a number of years as well as part of a project. So, it doesn't necessarily, like, if you had a 3-year plan and you could show ramping up of planting, but still hit a minimum of 10,000 per year, then that could work as a proposal as well. So it depends on how you want to structure that. And then otherwise, in terms of other sourcing, I'm not sure how to answer that one, unless anybody else has any ideas. But really, we're not in the business of helping source any of the seedlings.
I think on that one, Ben, we could also mention that the right tree for the right place is a really important premise for the program. And so if we got involved in sourcing trees, it's very difficult to source the right trees for the right projects. And so the responsibility is of the applicant to propose projects and tree types and tree sizes that are appropriate for their projects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for the next question for Anna-Len, is there any recognition, potential consideration for long-term carbon sequestered in woody shrubs, which are important in riparian systems, for example, or is the program limited to trees?
So we had to put a sandbox around what the program will do. And I would say, generally speaking, the program is limited to trees, absolutely recognizing that, in fact, not only some of the shrub, but, to this extent, grassland and other ecosystem do a fair amount when it comes to GHG mitigation. So there is, if that is a focus of your project, and the purpose is specifically to plant shrubs in a riparian area for restoration, let's say, I would also suggest you check out and the website from an ECCC programs, the ones that I listed at the beginning, because I think that would be a particularly well-suited program. If what you want to do is plant shrubs and trees in a broad type of restoration program project, then I think it's something we could consider up to a certain percent. So for us, whichever project we will support, we'll have to focus on trees. But there could be a few shrubs in there, I would think so.
Thank you. Ben, adding to the nursery question that we had, would developing a seed bank to support, oops, sorry, I lost the question. Would developing a seed bank to support future tree planting projects be eligible under either the capacity building or planting streams?
It could be part of the capacity building. Sorry, the reason I'm struggling is because it's a worthwhile activity, and I think it's just that from a program perspective, we're not really there yet in terms of our call for proposals, in terms of setting up that kind of to support sort of the seed collection on its own, like as a piece on its own. So I'm struggling sort of thinking of how it could be a standalone project. I mean, it would again, likely, like the nurseries, have to have a tree planting component to it, but it could be potentially a capacity building project. So, I mean, it's an interesting idea, but it's something that the program, and that's where I talk about sort of future calls for proposals, is something where we're looking at still and figuring out a good way to include that as part of sort of an easy on its own kind of project. I don't know if that's the sort of best answer I can come up with, like on the fly like that, but.
Thanks, Ben. Question for Annalyn. The eligible locations mentions tree planting can happen on private and public land. Can you provide some examples of public land that tree planting locations can happen on?
Sure. So for instance, I can think of some of the projects that took place this year where an NGO worked with us, and in fact, one of the provinces, to regenerate some severely burned stands and ecosystems. So that happened on Crown land. So that's an example that was close to a community with forest of interest. Another example could be in a park. So let's think of some of our urban parks, for instance. So some NGO or some community organization could want to support something happening on this land. Restoration is another example. Restoration projects, municipal land, parks, public parks, etc., etc. One thing that I would note on all of this, and for instance, this year we supported some of that type of projects, is that what the program requires is as a proof of that you can access the land and you have secured the required permits. So we don't really want to find ourselves in a position of supporting guerrilla operations where we would create tension with the landowners, whether that landowner is public or private. So that's part of the application form, in fact. But those are some examples. I'm sure there are others.
Merci, Annalyn. Thank you. The question for Ben: for immature stands that were killed by wildfire, would this program cover the costs for assessments and knockdown of danger trees prior to planting?
Unless, correct me if I'm wrong, Annalyn, but yes, that would be eligible. Yeah, so yeah, it would be eligible. Yeah, can't think of why we wouldn't. And as long as there's no obligation to replant, then yeah.
T'es de nouveau en sourdine, Suzy.
Twice now, thank you. Ben, is a First Nations forestry related development corporation eligible to apply if it's a for-profit entity?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I mean, I guess I'm just, because I'm trying to think of what kind of, if it's a for-profit entity, then absolutely they could apply. As long as it's incorporated and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Next question. Actually, before I get to the next question, we're getting close to the end of our session. Just again, to reiterate that we will not be able to get to everyone's questions today, but we will follow up with the FAQs and also the presentation from today, and then you can reach out to the program team if those two documents don't help you answer your questions. So this next question for Ben: if organizations are partnering in order to meet minimum tree requirements, but one organization falls within the urban stream and the other organization falls under the rural stream or mass planting stream or another stream, any suggestions for how they can navigate the application?
I mean, that's a brain twister, that one. I'm trying to think of how you how you would intertwine those two projects. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like, it would be something I think we'd have to look at in terms of what the organization is thinking, or what those organizations are thinking, or some sort of like brief synopsis or whatever to provide sort of a better thought on that one. I mean, fundamentally, if you're we're looking for 500,000 for the mass planting and 10,000 for the urban. I mean, if there's, I'm just not sure how you merge those two kinds of projects together. I guess I'd have to see the case. Sorry.
No, I think that's a fair answer to a complicated question. Anne-Hélène, will the program consider seed deployment or staking projects, or must the seedlings be rooted for eligibility?
Yes, it goes back to our previous question. So we're looking at seedlings rather than seeds, if I understood the question properly. We're also aware that increasingly the technology to regenerate forest or from seeds is improving with pretty significant success rates. So we will consider to look into this for future call for proposal. At this stage, generally speaking, we are looking at seedlings.
Thank you.
Forms of.
Ben, for the monitoring component, can this be linked to or a component of an Indigenous Guardians program? So this is an Environment and Climate Change Canada program that may also be funded by the federal government. So we're looking at a stacking question here.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I mean, the 2 billion tree program has 100% stacking. So if there is other funding coming from other federal departments like the Guardians program, as long as there's no, that there's no issues with the Guardians program in terms of their stacking limits or anything like that, then it's fine for sure. Yeah.
Okay, I think we might be able to squeeze in a couple more, maybe, if depending on how we get to these. But Anne-Hélène or Ben, what is the maximum amount given by the program? So I'm assuming this is by project per year.
So we do have a maximum amount, but I don't have it in my head right now. Do you, Ben?
Yeah, it's I'd have to look in the
I can
guide. 40 million a year. Okay, yeah, sorry. So it is, so for organizations, it's $40 million a year.
Okay, and I'm going to go to our last question, and then I'll pass it off to Anne-Hélène because she'll be closing this session. Would providing saplings for homeowners with proper planting guidance be acceptable?
The question is for me as well?
Yeah, or Ben. This is our last question.
Yeah, so this is the tree where I think we're talking sort of a tree giveaway kind of program in an urban scenario. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can jump in there, Anne-Hélène. I mean, so far we have not considered tree giveaways as an eligible portion of the program or something that we would reimburse, because again, the ongoing sort of monitoring that we're, the focus on GHG sequestration. So it's something where we've been told by different municipalities is a key part of their their urban planting projects, and something that we can we've considered, but at this point or whatever, they're not sort of an eligible part of a project.
Yes, and I would just on that one re-emphasize that some of these programs, the giveaway programs, we know have been successful. So we're looking into ways maybe to consider it at some point. A fundamental issue really is that the program is aiming to track and report on the exact location and the continuous well-being on some of these trees. And that would be difficult to do through a giveaway program. Project, for instance, would not allow us at all to do any of this. So we might consider it as in a secondary step, but not in the context of the CFP. Do you want me to go through, Susie?
Thank you. I think, yep, I think that brings us to the end of the Q&A session. I'll leave it to you, Anne-Hélène, to close the session.
Well, thank you all for attending. I really hope that this answered a lot of your questions. We will make the webinar available, the recording available, share the presentation, share our Q&A document we've put together with you to answer likely some of the questions you heard today, but also others. Now, there's a few reminders from this. The CFP closes on February 17th. And if you want more news, we're thinking, for instance, of having additional webinars in the new year. You can find some of these news on the web pages, so that the first hyperlink there on top. If today or the Q&A document did not respond to some of your questions, or you want to follow up with us, please use the email address at the second hyperlink, the generic email address. And so we have a generic inbox because this is for us the best way to make sure you will get an answer. Like if you were to email, let's pick on me, for instance, I'm notoriously unreliable in responding to my email, but this inbox will give you, will make sure to get your response and address your concerns. In terms of other things, we might, after this is over, we'll send you a short poll. It takes 2 minutes for you to cover, and you know, it's regards like, did you like it, was something missing, etc., etc. That will help us make things better over time, and maybe for the next webinars. And with all this, I think I wish you happy holidays, and again, thank you for all your time today.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.